that Peter has mentioned, transport, construction, food, and IT as well. So, but the monitoring indeed is a very difficult task. We don't have an official monitoring system. Some member states are having official statistics on this, but these are very rare. And so, as I said before, we're relying on surveys, and surveys have to be taken with a lot of caution. So, first of all, do you reach all the public procurers in Europe with surveys? Not all of them want to participate in this. You have to make a lot of work. You have to translate the questions into all languages of the procurers. And then I think the numbers that we have presented are probably a bit too optimistic, because I suspect that there is a certain positive response bias, as statisticians are calling it. They say that it's more likely that somebody who is doing green procurement is participating in such a survey than somebody who is not so good at green procurement. So we are still, there's a lot of leeway within Europe to improve green procurement. And whenever I speak about the question of monitoring, and I'm meeting somebody from a member state, I like to give the advice: if you have the power, include monitoring obligations in public tenders. We see this now, for example, it's not only because you know more what they're doing, but it's also that they are doing it more. It's we just have a new report from Malta, a very small EU country, where they have included a mandatory obligation to report, did you buy green or not? And they see just by the fact that you have to report if you did it or not, they are doing it more. So it is a win-win situation if you manage to do that. Unfortunately, at EU level, we didn't succeed in convincing the member states that they have to do this reporting. Infrastructure projects, indeed, second question, a very important field and also a very tricky field for green public procurement. What we're seeing now, and that might be of interest for you as well, we're having a public consultation going on still until Thursday on wastewater treatment plants, which are big infrastructure projects, very costly, and they have a long running time, and very often the costs of running these infrastructures is much higher than the production costs of this. So again, as Peter has mentioned it, to think about the life cycle, the costs that are in the operational phase and the maintenance phase are very, very important. And there we see some limitations also what we can do from Brussels with recommending green public procurement criteria. So in principle, each project that we see there is unique and needs its own assessment. So what you need is real expertise. You need to have, if you don't have the expertise yourself, you need to have a consultant who can make a life cycle costing analysis at the very beginning. And as Peter has mentioned, the pre-procurement phase is very important. You have to establish your needs. And for example, for a wastewater treatment plant, it's very important what will be the quality of the water leaving the wastewater plant. And this is influencing the process very much. And the question is, where do you place it? Is there a connection with the drinking water system, and so on and so forth? And if you don't make these calculations at the moment, at the very beginning, before you start the project, you're probably missing out on 50% of the environmental impacts and also on the economic savings. So you have to invest a lot, and you have to have good people in the beginning of the project in order to reap the full benefits. Later on, even with the nicest construction criteria, when you make the tender for the construction, you cannot repair anymore what you have missed in the very beginning. So this is a very important thing, but also if you send me an email, I can send you more information about the wastewater treatment project.
Okay, and I will try to answer your other questions. I'm not 100% sure if I understood it correctly, but it was about the award phase, award criteria, and green services. And according to the European Directive on Procurement, you can either go for the most economic advantageous tender, or you can choose the lowest price procurements. And if you use the lowest price, all other criteria have to be used in the technical specification, because it's only price you can award if you choose that one. But if you use the most economically advantageous tender, you can use other criteria like environmental issues and quality, service, and so on. Price will also be a factor, of course. My experience from Sweden is that many procurements are lowest price because of the complexity of public procurement. So in that case, they use green issues in the technical specification, that is mandatory requirements that have to be fulfilled. And of course, it is voluntary for procurement entities to choose whether they choose the lowest price or the other alternative. We try to split up services when we develop criteria for different services. We have services which are directly influencing the environment, like transportation services, like food services, canteen services, and cleaning services. But then you also have a lot of services that are soft services, like consultant companies, and in that case the direct impact on the environment is not so evident. You have to look at what are the other impacts from their services. If it is an environmental consultant, it might be the most important for the environment might be his references and his experiences and his knowledge, not what is actually how he is traveling to and from his job and so on. So you really have to look into these soft services to see whether they have some sort of impact on the environment. If you look at lawyer services, it might not be relevant to have environmental criteria for that kind of services. But if there are constructing services, architects, they can have a huge impact in the end if they do a good job or not. And in that case, they need to have some good experience from working on green constructions, or choosing the right construction materials and so on, or the right construction from an environmental or energy point of view. So I think it's important to see those two different variations in services, the direct impact and the indirect impacts. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Robert. But for Peter, I would like to make sure, because you mentioned that for most service procurement, most green public procurement in Europe, or according to your experience, most of them use the lowest tender method, right? But I would like to make sure for the architecture or for the consultant firms, as you mentioned, you need to consider their experience, particularly in the experience of select the right goods or the right design criteria. So will you use the most advantage tender for this kind of consultant firms? Will you, or you still use the lowest tender? Thank you.
I don't have the statistics of Sweden, because there is a big lack of statistics how procurement is performed in Sweden. I also think in Europe, I think Robert mentioned that. But it's very, I think it depends on how the procurement is done and how much resources you have at the procurement entity level. But I think when it comes to services or consultant services, they use the qualification criteria that are mandatory requirements that are aimed for the organization, the competence, how much competence do you have in the organization, how much experience do you have, and those kind of criteria will be compulsory. You have to fulfill them in order to show that you can actually perform a contract with all these environmental standards. So I think experience and competence will be in this phase of the procurement, not in the award. The award will be more like, how would you suggest for us to perform this contract? Do you have what is possible for us to pay some extra money for? That will be some extra performance or extra skills on, or extra good ideas on how to construct this bridge or this house or whatever. So I think they I'm not sure if it's if Robert will have any other answers on this, but my Swedish experience is that they try to use experience and competence in the qualification phase, not in the award phase in the end.
Yeah, maybe I can add on this. Petra, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a change foreseen in the public procurement reform. So because at the moment it is the way that Peter has described it. In principle, it's an in or out regarding the experience and the qualification of the staff. So you don't make gradual evaluations, but this might change in the future depending on the final text adopted by the Parliament and by the Council, that you will have the possibility to say, okay, I will also take into account the quality of the team as the as an award criteria and the experience of a team. And this could be quite helpful for sustainability projects. And then the question of the most economically advantageous tender would come in again.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Karkovic and Mr. Norstad. Thank you for your sharing. And now let us welcome Mr. Eric Nutben to wrap the seminar up. Mr. Nutben.
Thank you. Let me first of all thank the two friends from Brussels and Stockholm, Robert and Peter, for their contribution to this seminar. They gave excellent presentations, and they also show how to do a green conference. As Peter already correctly spelled out, it saved travel, it saved lots of time. It was very green, but I don't think we had any backslash on the quality. We had a very good discussion and very good presentation. So thank you very much, you there in Brussels and in Stockholm. If I look back to today's conference, I must say that, as far as I see it, we had a very successful day and we fully achieved our objectives. Our objective was that in the context of the closer EU-Taiwan cooperation in the field of procurement, we should organize conferences to exchange best practices, to look forward to trends which are building up, and to make sure that we are, from both sides, well informed about the current state of play on procurement. And I think the idea to pick green procurement as the theme of this year's conference was an excellent idea. I think we have all learned that it has become an ever more important part of the way in which governments spend their monies, the taxpayers' monies, that the concept of green spending is becoming ever more present in these spending facilities. Reference has been made to the trend in the European Union to also allow, through legislative means, the green procurement by central entities and local entities. And as a matter of fact, I'm very pleased to inform you that yesterday in Brussels, the Council of Ministers adopted, as a first step in the legislative process, a general approach on the new European legislation in the field of procurement. And a very important element of that modernization, as I said this morning, is that the European legislator wants to facilitate green procurement by European entities. And indeed, yesterday the ministers agreed on a concept which will now be discussed with the European Parliament. And the concept will be that European contracting entities will have more flexibility to include in their procurement strategic objectives such as green procurement. The key word here is life cycle cost. So our contracting entities will have the possibility, when they are assessing bids, to take environmental and social criteria into consideration when awarding the contract to the best bidder. I learned also through some of the interventions, for which I would like to thank the audience also very much, that there is also some concern about the possible impact of a green procurement on international trade flows. And let me confirm what has been said also by the earlier speakers, that of course green procurement does by no means add any obstacle to international trade. Green procurement is just a development in our economies that we want to provide the citizens with a better environment, with greener environment, and we also want to make sure that our children will also live in a healthy, clean world. And we will, in this policy, not discriminate against any country. It will, of course, mean, however, that suppliers will have to take into account when they are producing their products that there are higher standards applicable, probably globally, with respect to emissions, with respect to social elements. So it will mean that the suppliers and the industries will have to adapt to these requirements. But let me repeat again, that also in Europe, and this has been said, no contracting entity will be obliged to apply green procurement. The only thing we are doing currently in Europe is to provide a legal framework for those entities who want to go greener or more sustainable. Well, I think that we should certainly continue this discussion on the green procurement and social procurement. As I explained to you this morning, we are also having a regulatory dialogue with the PCC, which we will have tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and I think that also part of our discussion will be also to evaluate the results of today's conference. I think that the PCC also learned a lot from the presentations made by the European speakers. We also picked up some novelties from the excellent presentation from the representative of the EPA in Taipei. So we learned a lot, we will take it with us, and I hope that it will all bring us a better world, a greener world, also with the help of governments and local entities. So a big thanks again for the PCC to have organized this together with EPA and the Australian Commercial Office. Also to the ECC, the European Trade Office, who has also had a very big helping hand in all this. I hope you all enjoyed it and you have much things to think about when you go back home. Thank you again and hope to see you next year in our next annual conference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, guests from Brussels and Stockholm. And thank you, speakers. Thank you for your participation and have a pleasant evening.